Hello? Just a second. Sound. Okay, we'll have to test that. Okay, today is August 22nd. It's 11:24 a.m. This is episode 3 of the Immigrants Guide to Sci-Fi World. And it's entitled Shock the Monkey because we're going to talk about magnetic shocks and other kinds of shocks. Basically, I need to stop thinking about that for a minute and proceed with the quick recap of where we're at with the sun disease. And the sun disease, we note, has, from the old data sets, has 2 levels of meaning here. One has to do with the big scary ball in the sky and its new our relationship to its new behavior, which we're not going to go into today. I've done enough about that recently. But the other is the shell aspect of it, the corona aspect of it, and how the sun disease could be applied to the corona stuff, right? In any event, the virus at the moment, the issue, where we're at there, at least 50% of us are probably immune via T cells. Anybody with vitamin D levels over 40 nanograms per milliliter, it has para-immunity. Unfortunately, 72% of the planet is vitamin D deficient to some degree. The more vitamin D insufficiency you have, the higher your risk of a bad outcome from sun disease. The politicos are not, the people that were in charge of everything really seriously fucked up. Lockdown was never necessary. It was only necessary that people with vulnerabilities that are older, etc., would self-isolate. Never necessary that the regular population should do so. Children, to a great extent, are less susceptible because the ACE2 receptor levels are lower in them, as are the other receptors. Their bodies aren't as big. They don't have as many of these things in them. So they have less of a potential to acquire it. They can certainly spread it, etc. What we know about the actual virus itself is that it is a bioweapon. It does come from a laboratory. It's very weak against optimal vitamins inside a human or any other being. It can't survive that. It dies in about 15 minutes in UVB light. UVA can fry it really quick if you can get enough of it on it. It can show up on surfaces for weeks and months, but this is extremely misleading, and here's the issue there. Two factors. This virus does not reproduce very well, so it leaves all kinds of reproductive genomic trash lying all over on surfaces as vironic particles that are spewed out by the person that has the virus. But most of those are not able to be infectious to another human. So it has this very low productive value for a rate of infection caused by reproduction because it does not reproduce well. It may spew out millions of particles, but very few of them relatively will be a complete virus ready to infect you should you acquire it. And here's the other thing. Getting it on a surface, you would have to coat your finger with it completely like it was, powdered sugar. Just totally, completely coat your finger and shove it up your nose as far as you could and snort the stuff in order to maybe have a chance of getting it. And that's only if you have vitamin D insufficiency. So getting it off of a surface is damn near impossible. So all of this stuff with the cleaning and all of that, yeah, it's good to be clean, and I like that idea for the bacteria as well, but it's not really affecting the spread rate of the virus. The virus is now endemic all over the planet. We have to recognize that if you have adequate vitamin D and adequate vitamin C in your system, you have para-immunity to this and you won't get ill even if you encounter it. So the factors about the infection rate and the ability to get it off of a surface, those two factors, meaning that you just take huge amounts of it on your finger to find enough infective particles, and then you'd have to get them way up in your snout, and it really does need to have moisture when it transmits. So it's almost got to be in expelled moisture in order to be infectious. So it's not really very good at being infectious or infective. Now, the new variety that supposedly is 10 times more infection, causes 10 times more infection because it's 10 times more virulent, which funny use of the term, that's again misleading. It just simply has the ability to attack receptive cells better. That's all. If you're not permissive, that is, if your cells have adequate vitamin D and they zap it with vitamin D and vitamin C, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how infectious it is, right? Because you're not permissive. Your cells won't permit it to grow within you. And so maybe it can find more receptors, but that's meaningless if you if you have the vitamin D levels and the vitamin C levels in your body. It doesn't alter the equation for those people that are pursuing that route. In that sense, we know a great deal more about the virus, and we also know that it has a very, 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 very low kill rate, totally less than the flu. We didn't know this 6 months back. It has a very high kill rate in specific cases, like in China, in India, in the middle or ending of winter, when nobody there has any kind of vitamin D. It's just popping people off right and left, including young people that would not have been vulnerable had it been spring necessarily, right? Because they might have been out playing soccer or something like that. So under the circumstances, we know that as a bioweapon, it's like, if you're healthy and you got good, adequate vitamin D levels in you, you're not going to have a problem with the thing. But anybody who's aged, anybody young or old or middle age that has low vitamin D is potentially a victim. And this low vitamin D can sometimes express itself as other diseases, in the sense that you can assume that anybody who's lying around in a nursing home, doesn't get out in the sun, they're going to have low vitamin D unless they're actively supplementing quite a bit. If you're older, you're making less. If you have diabetes, you're making less. If you're obese, you've got to get more because it's fat soluble. So yada, 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 go look it up. See where your relationship with vitamin D is, get your vitamin D tested, and know that you're immune. Don't worry about it anymore. Chaga mushroom works because it is a polymorphic, polymodality mushroom. That is to say, it has vitamins, it has vitamin D, it has zinc, it has mineral co-locating things, zinc ionophores, okay? So it passes zinc between the cell membranes, those kind of things. It has immunomodulators, so it modulates your immune system so you don't get cytokine storms or histamine reactions, that sort of thing. It lowers inflammation. It plumps up the endothelial layer, and so on and so on and so on. So it cooperates with vitamins. So if you can provide chaga mushroom, and to a lesser extent shiitake mushroom, which does maybe 2/3 of what chaga does, and you put it with the vitamins, you're at a maximal level of protection once you get your vitamin D above 40 nanograms per milliliter, and then every day take 22 milligrams of vitamin C per pound as you go through your day. So that you got your vitamin D and your vitamin C out there, and you get nice and strong. Can't really see it. Anyway, okay, so that really was not the subject of this. I just had so many people asking where we at here. And yes, the politicos are using the masks as some kind of weird-ass, thou shalt march kind of mind control fuck thing. There's no science there at all, no science. The only people that should wear masks are those people that have it, those people that are tending people that have it, and those people that are vulnerable if you're going to be around people that have it. And virtually no one needs to wear it outside in sunlight. I think it's cool to avoid the the facial ID shit, though, because I'm a paranoid, right? So I would wear a mask the same reason that the Antifa bastards would wear masks, to try and avoid facial recognition. Pretty much for the same reason, because I'm paranoid about government, too. Anyway, so we got food issues, we've got coffee famine and a chocolate issue coming up, chocolate famine, all different kinds of stuff from the data, but I'm going to have to talk about that later. We've had a number of things go on here. My ability to do any kind of cut out any time to for any of this is shrinking and may shrink down to nothing over the course of the next few months. In any event, though, so let's get on with it real quick here. So basically, Shock the Monkey is about the this. So in that sense, this is a verbal white paper about how the Tic Tac or the gimbal UFO work, and what is the mechanism whereby they're able to go zipping about, and how do they do this. And let me state a couple of things that are a basic premise here, all right? Humans currently can go into space with machinery that becomes more and more and more complex the more we ask it to do relative to going into space. So if we're going to ask it to go further, we got to be able to carry more fuel. So we're going to need more piping, which makes it heavier. We're going to need more control circuits, which makes the software larger and more memory intensive and so on, right? So everything bulks up every time we ask the machinery to more in terms of taking us out into space. If it's going to take more people, more weight, any of these factors, and all of these factors continually combine, making these machines ever more complex as we go forward. No matter what we do, no matter how efficient we make these rockets, no matter how efficient we make our propulsion mechanisms that are based on the second law of thermodynamics, this will always be true. This is a Moore's law kind of a thing in reverse, right? Instead of gaining as the chip doubles the number of transistors on it every 18 months or whatever it is, here we have a situation where the rocket gains that much more weight, which makes it that much more slow, which means it's got to carry more fuel to get it up for more thrust, et cetera, as it goes on. So it's a net losing proposition. And ultimately, we find that is due to engineering, okay, that's engineering within what is called the field. Okay, the field in this meaning is referring to reality, the material world, what I call materium. And so that's the word I use. And so I'm going to discuss some stuff that's relative to the physics of the ether. And we always need to keep in our minds that materium, where all this shit is, where we are, where our physical bodies are, is a condensate within a field within the ether. Now, within the field, within the ether, we also have other things that are less dense, perhaps, all the way up to non-spatial, non-dense at all. And an example of that would be a magnetic interreaction, where the magnets interact because of, or do so by altering the field itself such that they are, hang on, they're able to be affected at a distance, with magnetic forces that have no spatial counterpart. So there's no atoms being moved. There's no little anything, no atomic particles that are making the upper magnets here vibrate relative to my moving the lower magnets. It's simply my distorting the field in which everything exists due to the nature of what magnets are. Okay. So we've established that this is all happening within the field. So a magnetic field is not really that. It is really a localized distortion of the ether with certain known parameters that can be analyzed, can be discussed, are entirely laid out in excruciating, concise, precise detail in Boscovich's Theoria Naturalis Philosophiae. And we learn about the action at a distance stuff here relative to magnets and all other kinds of things within the materium as we go forward within his book. And we discover okay, so if you read Boscovich, especially parts 1 and 2, which you must in order to understand what he's saying in part 3, but part 3 to a certain extent is where the meat is, and the other are the supporting structure and bones. But parts 1 and 2 detail the actions. He describes as in Article 235, for instance, the oscillation that we see in the Tic Tac UFO as it comes to a sort of a stop. It oscillates and vibrates and then settles down and then and it's gone. Okay, and then there's some other things. So it has this movement where there is no go. It is just sitting, resting, go, or sitting, resting, gone. So it is unlike propulsion methods that we use, where it's burn, 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 go fast. Here it's just sitting there, nothing, go fast. The reason that occurs has to do with how magnets distort the local field, the etheric field. Okay, the way in which magnets do this, permanent magnets like I was just playing with, have this distortion, a localized distortion of the etheric field, and you're holding it, and it's around it, and it goes out a certain distance and then fades off to basic nothing. And if it didn't fade off to basic nothing, then everything that was potentially magnetic would eventually all adhere, and we'd all be living on a giant metal lump somewhere in the middle of the universe. And it can't really work that way. The localized disturbance of the etheric field within the magnets is what we manipulate in order to make these machines that cause the microphone to work, the diaphragm and all of that, catch the vibrations, and it transmits and then the video, the opticon tube, and the pick up on it now in a transistorized form all the way down to the chip and then through into the internet, and then decoding it all. It's all based on distortion of magnetic fields, ones and zeros. The magnetic field is either being highlighted or depressed, fundamentally, okay, charged and discharge. So without getting into the bizarreness of quantum physics or any of that, we're going to hop right into the ether, and we're going to explain how the little Tic Tac UFOs move and what they're actually doing when we see them operate, okay? So behind me here we have our little Shock the Monkey compass rose, all right? It's a three-dimensional representation of a Z, Y, and an X axis. And there is no flat reference, there's no reference of any kind within universe. There's no up, there's no down, there's simply here and not here, here and out from here, that sort of thing. But let's assume that we're going to take as our reference point the intersection of these three axes, and we'll just call this prime. Okay, so, or null, sorry, we'll call this null. And so this is going to be the point of origin. Now we could, for instance, just to make an assumption that we've got a situation where our point of null, let me just back off a little bit here. Okay. And so we can just make the assumption that our point of null here, where these three axes meet, is in San Diego. And that's where those meet right there. That's the ocean just off of San Diego, maybe 70, 80 miles out. And so what we've got going on here is this is the point at which the UFO driver has decided that in the Tic Tac UFO or the gimbal UFO, any of those has decided that they're going to leave our local environment. And they're going to leave our local environment of Earth with their magnetic drive. And what they're actually doing is that they are relative to their own vessel, they're creating a magnetic disturbance, very much like a permanent electric magnet, in the sense that you fire electricity through the copper and it goes around the iron, and we create an electromagnetic effect. There is a magnetic disturbance in all ways that's similar to these. Permanent magnets, only it's controllable by the amount of electricity you put in there, and it goes away when mostly it fades when you take the electricity out. And so, like an electromagnet, our spaceships here, our UFO guys, they create a magnetic disturbance by some means that at this point we don't need to discuss, because we can't discuss it in enough detail. But there are some details that are known relative to the skin of the ship, how it must work magnetically for all of this to function. And it coincides that should the ship be built this way to function this way relative to magnetic distortions, then indeed we would observe certain effects, such as the oscillation of when it would slow down and so on. Okay, so here's what we need to know. When you create a magnetic disturbance, it's not the way we've seen it described throughout high school in Western physics. It has nothing to do with the little arcs coming back on both of the north and the south poles. Magnets really are, there's 4 points in the magnet you really care about. The poles, to a certain extent, are interesting because of what is going on there, but you really care more about the dielectric inertial plane and the geometric center of that magnetic disturbances within the object itself relative to that object. So it gets real complicated, even dealing with just permanent magnets. But at a simplistic level, what we have is that we have our little spaceship, and the guy gets in there, and say that we follow the idea of Bob Lazar, and that they use element 115 dropped into a cyclotron, which is to say accelerated extremely fast and then shot through a gap in a tube, which is to say a waveguide, because it prevents other kinds of waves from existing or exiting, and that this wave creates a localized magnetic or localized etheric field disturbance that generates locally a magnet absent stuff. Okay, so let me get some of these over here okay, so the magnets we have here are a ferric material embedded with boron and these permanent magnets, and neodymium there's a ferric and iron lattice in the middle of these things. And so you got to have some stuff here. We humans, so far as I'm able to determine, are not able to generate, just pop a magnetic field or a magnetic disturbance into existence in space. Okay, the UFO people, the UFO creators and originators and drivers and so on, are doing exactly that. They are creating a magnetic disturbance, as though they're creating a giant electromagnet in a spatial environment that has nothing that we would think of as being able to sustain that dielectric inertial plane that is this counter-rotating, precessing kind of a thing. Because there's no there insofar as we can see. It's just air, or it's just very rarefied air, or up in space, no air, but somehow they're able to do this. Well, the reason that they're able to do this is because what they're doing is they're not creating it in stuff. They're creating a disturbance in the etheric field that all of the materium is a condensate within. And when they do that, it's as though they're reaching through matter reaching through the illusion of matter to the underlying field that creates that matter, what Buckminster Fuller called the vector equilibrium in Synergetics and Synergetics 2, which is an interesting diversion where he duplicates much of what was done in Boscovich's work, but clearly he never read Boscovich. Because of the way that he goes about it. But nonetheless, okay, so these guys reach through the condensate of matter to basically touch the etheric field from which all matter originates, and then they create this disturbance within the field, and you get a spatial effect, which is non-spatial in origin, which is the magnetism. And so they get a big burst of magnetism, and then they have these vessels that are able to react to it. I can describe why and how these vessels are able to react to it at some further point. I don't have a lot of time for that. But at the moment, let's just say that here they are. This is San Diego, right there, where that little purple dot is, right at our null point is San Diego. And what these guys do is that they're floating up in the air there because they are magnetically attracted to whatever they decide to be magnetically attracted to within an etheric field disturbance. And so here is our Tic Tac UFO. And the thing is, it's spherical, okay? That's why they look like orbs sometimes, and other times they don't. It has to do with the phase change of light, okay? So they're sitting in, they could have been sitting in an old GMC motorhome like I want to use, right? And yet when you flip on the switch to do things, a field disturbance erupts around it because of the nature of the skin of the thing, and what you do to the material in that skin as the electricity goes through the device, and basically at that point it becomes electrically null. That's why it's called the null point, all right? And that is, the skin itself means that it has, in this sense, it has indeterminate electrically controlled magnetic properties that can override gravity, because magnetism is ever so much more powerful than gravity, and you can ride these magnetic waves and stuff. Now what this little blue line thing here is a very poor approximation of a spiral around our abscissi, okay? And so this abscissi X, we'll just say, is a north-south line, right? And Y is east-west, and Z is up and down. Okay, so this is going to be our north-south, and he wants to go south, let's just say south, which would in this case technically be towards the sun. And this right here is a spiral around the abscissi. So it is a spiral around, and what we're seeing here are these arcs as the spiral comes around to the top and then goes around and then comes around to the top. Each one of these right here would be arcs of attraction. And because of the nature of the way that magnetism works, and what it is, and how the dielectric expresses itself as this rolling and yet linear counterspatial implosion, if you will. Because of that, we also have arcs of repulsion on the other side of our abscissi, and this is the asymptote, okay? So as the energy winds down, it gets to the point where as it goes around the abscissi, it gets very, 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 very close near the end, and then sort of loses its impetus, peters out, fades away, and that never crosses that last time, never cuts the abscissi that last time. It just keeps coming infinitely close. So these are not parallel. They're going to just proceed closer and closer and closer until it loses all, it never actually does lose all of it, but until manifestly within space, there's no more measurable emanations. And this is the point of origin, which is also an asymptote that should show, I didn't really do it enough, but should show that it is created from a point of an arc coming down, and it comes close to the z-axis, but never ever quite crosses it, and it actually could have originated back here on this side of the axis in a previous time to spin out. And okay, so basically all magnetism works in this conical decreasing force spirals. And as a result of that, what these ships do is they make themselves opaque to magnetism. So the magnetism can't go through them, can't affect what's inside, and they create behind them, so to speak, this condition right here, and then they decide, okay, I want to go way the hell out here to where the sun is, and this is still that arc, and what I'll do is I'll just make this part of my ship here attractive to these attraction points, and I will skip right across all of them to this one way out here, and it does it instantly. It does it extremely fast because of the nature of how the attractive forces work in an etheric disturbance that we call the magnetic fields. They're extremely powerful. So it does not take magnets much bigger than this square one here. It does not take a magnet the size of a refrigerator to get to the point where humans could not push them together with bulldozers, okay? It takes a magnet the size of maybe a small, really small, maybe one of these blue tote bins, you might get at Kmart or something. If you had a permanent magnet that size, if you had two of them, and you put like poles facing each other and strapped one on one bulldozer and another on another bulldozer on flat plates, and we're talking D8 cats, something like that, big Cummins diesels, and you push them at each other, you wouldn't be able to ever push those two magnets to have their faces touch. That would not be possible on no road surface with the amount of power in any Cummins diesel, simply because of the nature of the dielectric and what's going on there as you push these things together. And so it starts seriously distorting as you go forward, as pushing the like to like on there. Now, on the reverse, if you want to jump, it's like almost impossible to keep them apart. And I'm going to let it go in a second. And see, so it gets to a point where I just can't, and it springs on me so fast I'm not able to tense my muscles any amount and get it past that point without it snapping in. And so that's basically what they're doing here. All right, because this is a decreasing cone, you could conceptualize it. Hang on a second. Let me get this. Sorry, those spark too. Okay, so it's a decreasing cone. It's from our viewpoint, it's straight. It doesn't go wonky this way, but that means that this arc up here, this is the asymptote. This arc up here, from the perception of a straight line, just goes right across the top of all of those guys down this way. So from the perspective of something that is wanting to be attracted to these various different points, you could easily imagine a situation where you could dial in how many of these jumps you want to make. And from the perspective of the magnet does not care if the distance between the two magnetic parts here is a few inches, and if you have the ability to control this, it doesn't care if it's just a few inches or if it's thousands of miles. It would take the same amount of time, absent the influence of other stray magnetic fields which cause a form of friction. But absent that, it would take the same amount of time to do the transit from this distance here as it would to do the transit from 80,000 feet up here down to San Diego. Time truly does not enter into the equation here. You just don't factor the navigation in these magnetic drives that way. Okay, so I've learned a whole lot. I've been involved with some other etheric people that are investigating the ether. We style ourselves as etheric physicists. We're able to make some significant progress. It's gotten to the point where I'm one of a bunch of people, I don't know how many exactly, but a number of us who are making patentable devices and discoveries, and are getting we're getting our shit together relative to ether as a physical, or as a physics discipline. The reason that we're doing this has to do with the times that we're in. So I'll leave this off here right at the moment. Okay, we'll go into this in some further detail after I've got more patents filed, and then we can discuss some of these other features that I and others have discovered of magnets. But basically, the idea is that the UFO creates a shock right here that creates a magnetic null point, which is the etheric or disturbance of the dielectric. It comes out in a conical fashion. It creates this abscissi, and it creates abscissi in all directions here relative to this. But then the UFO has already decided it wants to go that way, and it, through whatever mechanism that we don't know just yet, it fires off this element 115 through a waveguide that creates this magnetic shock, and then it's a shock wave rider, okay? And it rides the shock wave. And it goes zip, and because it's conical, it can just decide on this little software, oh, I want to go, 20 hops, and each of these hops is, 80,000 miles. And it goes, phew, and it's gone during that period of time that it would take us to even begin to get the engine started to go that first little bit, because it's not using propulsion. And so here's the thing, getting back to the complexity real quick. As we go forward in the future, our machines that do this kind of thing will become simpler. They'll become mechanically far simpler. There'll be far fewer moving parts, and it will be directly because at the moment we are trapped in a paradigm of a type of physics that when we want to do anything, complexity rises because we can't outthink complexity, right? But with etheric physics, we find that complexity falls as our thinking increases. Because the more I think about it, if I can create a device that can do as I'm describing here and make itself magnetically neutral, isolated, and then apply to itself a skin of whatever attraction, repulsion level of charge it wants, and then it can create this null point, then indeed it can skip across magnetic waves that would originate at the time that it created the null point. We wouldn't be able to see it because we're not able to see magnetism. It probably has devices that allow it to do just that. So it could probably scoot over a little bit in order to take advantage of a magnification effect, which is Article 435 in Boscovich, by the way, just to point that out to the etheric physicists that are pursuing it. That's where you get into the idea of how to magnify the physical, or the etheric disturbances, shapes, and how those magnify the power that are coming out of them within the materium. And we can go from there. But in any event, so the ship does that, but it could probably fire off its thing here out in the middle of space and get a reasonable effect to go from point A to point B. And it may also have the ability to piggyback, so to speak, on naturally occurring giant permanent magnets like Earth, Sun, blah, 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 because these magnetic fields are all the fuck everywhere. And they're interoperating right through us, through our machinery and so on. And it probably is just a magnificent environment to go skip about with your magnetically isolated device. And that's one of the keys that you've got to get into as you go forward. And it has to do with the folding of magnetic fields and how that works. Anyway, there was something else about that, not the parallel pipe heads. Anyway, so as complexity goes up with our machinery that are regular propulsion, we get to the point where you need, thousands and thousands and thousands of people just to make sure that you can operate your checklist because it's so complex. But as we get our etheric physics thinking up, we think so hard about it that we achieve the effects in a much more simple way through basic Aikido, through basic harmonization with the universe, to where we we have a riminage, an entering throw with the ether, and cause the disturbance that we wish to create. And so all of a sudden, right behind my back of my GMC motorhome here, I create a magnetic field the size of Jupiter, and I'm gone. So anyway, so that's the shock the monkey part, right? Now we've got all kinds of crap going on. We've got all of these poor kids who are isolated from success and denied entrance, and who've been deluded by their instruction for decades. And but at the same time, this is a great period of time because what we think of as the shittery, which is to say quantum mechanics, in general relativity, is dying now with the degradation of the money, the collapse of our university structure because it's reached peak corruption. Our social order has reached peak corruption. Nobody's really thinking about shit anymore. They're just, piling complexity on complexity, hoping that, refinement of complexity leads to enlightenment and so on, and it just doesn't work that way. But the whole shittery of institutionalized physics, is crapping out. It's non-functional. And the supporting structure, which is to say the universities, are also crapping out. So here's the time that the ether physics and the thinking there breaks out, and we're going to return to the inventiveness that we'd had in the 1930s. Speaking of which, I have to hurry here. It's a little after 12 now, and I like having my lunch and watching on Saturdays and watching Heather and her sidekick Brett. So it's like, what was the guy's name? So it was Gracie and George Burns. So it's like it's sort of like that show, right? But it's Heather Hying and Brett Weinstein. And he's an okay. They're both academics. She's smarter than he is, but she's kind and lets him think otherwise. And they're okay. They're academics, though, So what can you say? They've got a particular approach to life that just won't change. But their conceptions within that approach are actually breaking out. But anyway, so I got to get in there and get stuff done. So this is the relates to Boscovich 426, right? And this is all about the shock the monkey thing. So we're getting close. I mean, I've talked to a number of people here. I just got off a live stream with some fellows that are doing etheric physics, that are working on other aspects of magnetism. And we do this thing where we get together if we can every Saturday and report on what we've gotten that week. But it's been 3 weeks now because we just haven't been able to get together. 4 weeks, actually. With everything that's going on for everyone, but everybody's making progress in a almost weekly. Whenever you can get at it, next time you get at it, it's like, oh wow, there's this other bit of progress from that. So it's fun, it's exciting, something to do while the normies are going batshit with their lockdowns and stuff. But that's got to end. We got to stop that crap. So now I think that the route to go is, if our asshole government here in Washington State should decide that they're going to try a lockdown, I think I'm going to just have to invest some money in a lawyer to sue them, to just simply just to ask for them to show me science that supports their contention that whatever the fuck they want to do is going to be effective, because I know that the science does not exist. That's bullshit. Anyway, guys, get your pure sleep if you need to sleep. We've got a lot of people using it. I've got a guy that's 96 years old using it. He had some kidney issues, and needed something to sleep. That's one of the problems if you get like kidney cancer or things like that, is it affects your sleep for a lot of different reasons. And it worked for him. So I was very pleased about that. He's reported that it, so far he's on his second or third bag. He's got 3 bags. I think he's just finishing in his second one, but he'd already ordered ahead of need. And it helped him out. So good to know. You know, I may get to that point. I'm not 96 yet, but it's good to know I can still be using it at that age. Anyway, so I'll post this. A lot of other stuff going on, and that's hit or miss as we go forward. Got to get moving.